40-second difference in pace per mile, and 0.35 miles variance. That's a lot. It's like 4% different. 4%, get it? No.
Explode me, give it all to me, give it all to me. Explode me, give it all to me, give it all to me, give it all to me, give it all.
Point something miles today, anywhere between 7:55 and 8:25 minutes per mile. I'm not sure what I actually ran or how fast I actually ran anymore, because today I'm comparing the Apple Watch Series 4 Nike Plus versus the Garmin Vivoactive 3. I did my normal run commute home from work, which puts any GPS tracker, whether it's a phone or a watch, through a little bit of a GPS gauntlet. I'm running through downtown Chicago, where there's lots of going to be interference from skyrises, and then I went down a couple of flights of stairs to the Riverwalk from the main grade, down lower to the Riverwalk area, still within an urban canyon of sorts, and that area is really jagged, coming in and out and hugging a wall, and so that's a really tough place to go. And then I come out onto the lakefront path, and it's a little bit more open of an area there, and then ran north towards home. And so a couple of really weird things happening today. First of all, let's get a couple of kind of caveats out of the way here. I posted a photo of myself wearing both of these watches on Instagram yesterday, and I posted a couple of clips to my IG story, and some of you have already commented I shouldn't have been wearing them both on the same wrist, because that can do a couple of different things. One, it could lead to device interference, apparently, some have said, and other people have said that having the device further away from the actual position could somehow interfere. I've also done a similar test, not the same route, unfortunately, just because of the way my schedule worked out, but I've tried wearing them on both wrists as well. Mainly for the sake of the picture, I wore them both on the same wrist, and it'd be easier for me to kind of look at it both at the same time quickly without having to like look at one and then look at the other, which I had to do that on a subsequent run not all that fun and much harder to film. The other thing that I understand as a limitation of the video you're about to watch is that this is not a scientific study by any means. This is purely anecdotal data. I've done not scientific studies, but more at least scientific-ish studies when I tested the GPS versus GLONASS and GPS watch versus phone when I first got the Vivo Active 3. I think that to set up a true study, I'd probably have to do at least 5 of the same exact runs on similar weather conditions, and then normalizing, maybe even do more than that, maybe do 7 of the same run and then remove any outliers, do that kind of thing, so that way I have the exact same data repeated and repeatable. I still even think 5 runs under those kinds of scenarios wouldn't be statistically significant, so keep that as an indicator of the limitations of this type of activity. I think weather may play a factor. The other thing is that I also should have tested it under other conditions as well, which is what I kind of tried to do on my second run. I did another run along the lakefront, but not as difficult GPS conditions. I probably should have also tested it under kind of rural conditions as well, which I will have an opportunity to do. Just didn't have the time to do it right now for this video. And so I probably should have done at least 15 to 20 runs with this kind of setup, and then 15 to 20 runs with 1 on each wrist. The exact same thing, just to make sure that there's no differences there. But I'm not going to do that because that's a lot of, I run a lot. That's still too much running for me to do it with this kind of 2 wrist, 2 watch thing. It's a lot. I did 1 run, same wrist, 2 watches. So that's the way this particular test has been set up. I do have the benefit of some other kind of additional experience though. This is a run commute that I've done probably at least 50 times. So I have a general idea of what the distance is like, or at least according to my Garmin watch, what the distance is and what the paces are. And so I at least compared to other prior experiences and kind of what it felt like effort-wise, what I was feeling. Okay, all that out of the way. I got some really weird results from today, and it even gets weirder as the story progresses. So I'm going to look at my phone real quick. I apologize for that, just to make sure that I get the numbers correct. So I'm going to put a screenshot up on the screen showing you what the watches showed me the moment I stopped the run. And so then on my Garmin watch, I had 6.7 miles, I think 7:55 minutes per mile was the Garmin watch at that moment. And then the Nike watch had the data that it had, which was a little bit slower. It was 6.36 miles, I think, at 8 minutes, 24 seconds per mile, or it is whatever it is. You should be able to see the frame, the still frame on the screen now. Then here's what happened. As I was walking to pick up the girls from the end of the run to daycare and school, I then left my Garmin set how it's normally set, where the Garmin data pushes to Strava automatically. Once that happened, then the data that showed up in Strava was 6.6 miles at 7 minutes 56 seconds per mile. And this goes to kind of a couple of things that I think that are happening. I think that when you sync data from one GPS tracker, a recorder, the watch, the device, to the app, I think something's happening. I think that they're taking the GPS data and massaging it. So the data that Garmin had when it fed from the Garmin watch to Strava, Strava didn't take the tracing, the line that Garmin made, and it didn't take the metrics that Garmin had created. I think it takes the data points, and then it plugs in those data points, distances over time, which gives you velocity, and that it took that and put it into its own as if I had recorded the event in Strava, and that's why it gives me its own tracing as well. And that's why the numbers that Strava pumps out, even though it's importing GPS data from another app, is different than the app that it got it from. And I think that's why the data from the Nike watch can also be different from even those two as well. And so because on that one, the Nike Run Club app, we have a different GPS device, and we have a different app, which may have a different or more aggressive smoothing. And so I'm going to take a look at the actual map tracings. That's the part that I'm most concerned about. And look at the differences between the GPS data from the Garmin app, which shows a very jagged kind of tracing through the most difficult part. has me going across blocks, across the river, things like that. And then I'll compare that to the Nike Run Club app tracing, which in the beginning went super crazy because it had me going like diagonal about 200 meters across a block, or maybe even more than that, and back and forth it seemed. I'm not really sure what that tracing meant. And the other thing is I had to wait a really long time for the GPS to kind of catch on for the Garmin. So the Apple Watch was definitely in the Nike Run Club app and waiting. I didn't just turn on the app and start it. I waited for a little bit, and so that had a time for GPS to lock as well. And so other than that weird kind of jumping back and forth in the Nike Run Club app, the tracing is a lot smoother. And so what I think that there are possibly two things going on. One is that the Nike Run Club app and the Nike Apple Watch 4 is taking fewer GPS readings and kind of extrapolating and guessing where I ran and giving me something smoother, and maybe tying that down to maps it's aware of and ways people can go. Or it is taking as many, and I'm not sure, I haven't been able to figure out what the hertz is for the GPS recording. Is it once per second? Someone told me it was, somewhere I read say it was once every 10 seconds, which just doesn't sound right. But it was once a second is what I'm assuming it is. That's what I've set my Garmin watch to, is to data record, not the smart recording, but the once per second recording. And so at least I think that they should be at least recording at the same rate. And then it takes those data points, and rather than just plot them wherever they may be, wherever my GPS tells me I am, it's saying, okay, well, this one was an outlier, so let's delete that one, and we think he ran in a straight line, that kind of thing. And so I think that the apps are doing a little bit of the massaging. I think the GPS is it's just getting it from the GPS radio, or I'm assuming it's a transceiver, but maybe it's a receiver. Whatever that radio is, I think it must be a transceiver, transmitting and receiving signals. But I think that's what's happening, is whatever the device is, it's getting raw data points, like an Excel sheet worth of data, and then it gets put into an app, which it has its own algorithm in terms of how it determines what things are, in terms of your pace and your overall route. And so sometimes when I'm running in the city, you have very sharp turns, or sometimes I might have to double back a little bit to get from the corner over to a stairwell, and maybe the stairwell takes me down. And so there's going to be some switchbacks, things like that. And I think that apps like the Nike Run Club app, which seem to be a little bit more aggressive in smoothing, are going to have trouble with those kinds of routes where you have a lot of very sharp turns in tight quarters. And also if you're, for example, on a track, I think that's going to have some problems there. The Garmin app, I think it shows me a little bit more of a jagged tracing, and so I think it's going to be a little bit more accurate in that regard. But what it also means is that if there's a GPS recording that bounced off a wall to get to me for some reason, and it looks like I basically ran across the lake and back, not across the lake, I ran across the river and back, it's going to give me more distance and therefore a faster pace than what I actually ran. So I don't think that the actual distance I ran is in between the two. I think it's closer to what the Garmin says, but a little bit less good as what it says I did. So not quite as far and not quite as fast as what the Garmin said. The interesting part then I'll put up both on the screen the tracings of all three. The Strava tracing, which is taking the GPS data from the Garmin and doing its own tracing, the GPS tracing from the Garmin itself, and then I'll take the tracing from the Nike Run Club app, and I'll put all three of them on the screen at the same time so you guys can take a look. I did kind of a close-up view of the more difficult part right around that corner where there's most turns and kind of the most skyscrapers that are most tightly packed, and so you can kind of get a look at that. The other thing that I'm not quite sure of is, do the different apps have different GPS smoothing algorithms? So is there a secret sauce between the different apps, whether you're using Runkeeper, Strava, Garmin, Nike Run Club, Run Tracker, or are they just hooking into like a GPS smoothing API or like library that the iOS watch or the apps have built in? And if they are, does that mean that there's potential difference between a Garmin tracing in terms of distance and pace in an iOS device versus an Android device. And so I'm thinking there must be some sort of secret sauce that each of the run tracking apps has, and they're not just hooking into like an API or a toolkit that the OS itself has built for the purpose of the developer's convenience. But that's something, I don't know if you guys know the answer to that. That's probably beyond the scope of what I can really understand, and what you guys maybe find to be particularly useful. But in the comments, maybe we can have a little bit more detailed discussion down there if anybody knows. And then also, the weird thing that happened was I then looked at the Nike Run data, and depending on where you look within the Nike Run Club app, you're going to get a different result, or I got a different result. So when I looked at the detail of the run itself, I got 6.34 miles at 8 minutes, 24 seconds per mile. Then when I looked at the map view of the run, it told me I ran at 8 minutes and 27 seconds per mile. So within the same Nike Run Club app, within the same activity, the same data, it gave me a difference of 3 seconds per mile. That's weird. I don't understand that. But so far, I would say that right now, I think the Garmin is a little bit more accurate in terms of how far it felt like I run and how fast it felt like I was running. Also, the day before, I had done a similar run but with just the Nike watch, and that last mile I was really moving fast. I was feeling good. I was also running a little bit late, and so I was moving particularly quickly, and I felt like the Nike app just wasn't giving me enough love. I just felt like I was running much faster than this, and I felt like I was running much harder than the pace indicated that I was going. I felt like I was running under a 6-minute mile for like the last half mile. But Nike seemed to say that I was running in the 7s. So I'm not quite sure that I am in love with the way that the Nike Plus Apple Smartwatch Series 4 has been handling some of the GPS tracing data. But I'm not sure, and I've never been sure that the Garmin is quite correct. I've always thought that the Garmin kind of errs on the side of making you better than you actually were if it's going to make an error. And so I call it kind of like the Old Navy effect, where it gives you a number that you'd rather see rather than an actually true number. I don't know that it's quite to that level where they're intentionally inflating things or deflating things, depending on how you want to look at it in terms of the pace number versus the distance. But I always thought that the Garmin was a little bit generous. And I'm thinking that the Nike watch may be a little bit stingy. But I think the truth is not somewhere in the middle, but I think it's closer to the Garmin, at least so far. The area where I saw the watches have the most difference, however, was instantaneous pace. And I think that every device has a problem with instantaneous pace, and I think this is where the apps might also show the most difference, whether you're using any of the variety of run tracking apps or that you can use. Sometimes I would be running and I look down at my wrist and it shows me my my distance run and my instant pace. And sometimes I would show the numbers would be off by over a minute per mile. And sometimes it would be off by even more than that if I was in a particularly difficult spot. Like if I was underneath an overhang, then things would get really weird. And there in that situation, I can see that this difference in distance may make enough of a difference, or if there's any potential interference in the transceivers, that may make a difference under an overhang, under a particular difficult situation. So those are numbers that even I, when looking at it, that's obviously something that's kind of weird, and it's always transitory. It doesn't really last very long. But there were other times when I was running on like an open straightaway, nothing around me, just right by the water, where the two watches would be off by a significant amount. And that part was a little bit concerning. It seemed like the Nike watch would fluctuate a lot more. And it's possible that I was fluctuating in my own speed, but it seemed like the Nike watch was a little bit more all over the place depending on when I looked at the watch than the Garmin, which was a little bit more constant. But then again, I've not found a device that to me feels like it's as reliable as, say, like a speedometer on a car. And so I guess the way to test that would be to have someone on a bicycle that has a speedometer on it so that I can test the speed and the pace. That's actually a really good idea. Maybe that will be the next test. I'm gonna have to get that set up. I'm gonna have to call someone, phone a friend, and figure that part out. So we'll see if we can get that done. And then I will put both. When I do that one, I'll do both on one on each wrist. And I've done it before, one on each wrist on a subsequent run from the one you saw today, but I'll do it again that way just to eliminate some of the data. Although, if you think about it, I run funny and my left arm swings around a lot more than my right. And so, I don't know, all you guys that are saying that this makes a big difference, this distance, are you gonna be happy if I put them on one on each wrist? I'm not sure. So that's my anecdotal results on my first comparison between the two on the same wrist. I don't know that I'll do a ton more testing. I'll definitely try to get a bike test in there so I can see what that's like. Other than that, I'll report back on my overall thoughts of the Nike watch when I'm using just it alone itself, comparing it to my experience and other prior data, because I do have a wealth of data to pull from prior runs along similar routes under similar conditions. So it'll be like a retrospective analysis rather than kind of an active study, but it's not a blind study in any event. So I think a retrospective analysis will be okay, at least for the purposes of a guy talking about GPS watches on YouTube. So let me know if you have any questions. I'm sure you guys have a lot to say. I can't wait to see what you guys come up with. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Yo, what's going on?